Porsche is one of my favorite car companies, and if you're watching this video, there's probably a good chance they're one of your favorites as well. Over the past 2 decades, Porsche has done an excellent job at creating a lineup that appeals to a massive percentage of the car buying population while still maintaining an intense following amongst enthusiasts. And today we are going to look at every model that's currently in the Porsche lineup and talk about why it was added and what role it fills in making Porsche's lineup so well-rounded. And before we dive into specifics, let's just acknowledge that compared to other car companies, Porsche's lineup is pretty limited and they don't really sell that many cars. Like if we were to use another luxury car brand to compare against, like BMW sold about 330,000 cars in the US during 2023. Meanwhile, Porsche only sold around 75,000 cars. To be fair to Porsche though, the entry point into their brand comes at a much higher price and they only have 6 models total. Meanwhile, BMW has more than just 6 models of different SUVs. So I do think that Porsche is still punching above their weight. So the first model that we are going to touch on is the 718. The 718 is Porsche's mid-engine entry-level sports car. And probably the most important thing to remember about the 718 is that it's actually 2 different cars, the 718 Cayman and the 718 Boxster. The Boxster was first introduced in 1996 and the Cayman in 2005. And while these 2 cars have always been pretty closely related, it wasn't until 2016 that they were both brought under the same name in the form of the 718. And like many other models in Porsche's lineup, the 718 covers a really wide range in terms of price and performance. Like for example, the most entry-level 718 features a turbocharged 4-cylinder engine that makes around 300 horsepower, while the top-of-the-line GT4 RS features a naturally aspirated flat-6 engine straight out of the GT3 that makes around 490 horsepower. And that GT4 RS costs almost 3 times the price of the entry-level 718. Interestingly, it wasn't until recently that we started getting these really high-performance versions of the Cayman and the Boxster. The running theory for a long time was that Porsche was afraid of giving too much power to these cars, that they would start to cannibalize sales from the 911. But regardless, the overall role of the 718 is to be an entry point into Porsche sports cars. As the 911 has gotten more expensive and continued to move up market, the 718 is able to fill that gap. The next model that we are going to talk about is the Porsche Macan. Now, the Macan is narrowly Porsche's best-selling model, but it is the Porsche model that I see the most living here in the Northeast. The Macan is a compact crossover SUV that came out in 2014, and I think it was a really smart move by Porsche for a few different reasons. First, it was a response to pretty obvious changes in consumer preferences as more and more people opted for crossover SUVs opposed to traditional sedans. Additionally, Porsche was able to build the Macan by leveraging their place within the Volkswagen Group, as the Macan shares a platform with the Audi Q5. And while the Macan doesn't have a standout trim for an ultra high performance version, the top of the line Macan GTS still has a lot of go fast bits and a 430 horsepower turbo V6. The Macan is also the first Porsche model that will have its own standalone full electric version. Obviously, Porsche already has the Taycan, but to electrify one of their existing models, it really makes sense to move forward with the Macan, because Porsche is trying to capture the space in the market that's just above vehicles like the Tesla Model Y or the Mustang Mach-E. So to zoom back out, the Macan fills the role as being the entry-level Porsche for people that really resonate with the brand, but for one reason or another don't want to get a sports car. Now, the Macan's big brother is the Porsche Cayenne. The Porsche Cayenne is a large or a full-size crossover SUV that originally came out in 2002. And at the time, it was very controversial. The turn of the century was a time where Porsche was going through a lot of changes. It had made a major design change with its core product, the Porsche 911, as it transitioned from air-cooled engines to water-cooled engines, as well as a big styling makeover. And then a few years later, Porsche came out with an SUV, which would have been something that was unthinkable just a decade before. And this led to a lot of people wondering if Porsche had lost their way. But I think we can say pretty confidently now, looking back, that they did not. What the Cayenne did do, though, is it sold really well, and it gave Porsche the cash to continue producing sports cars. Now, the Cayenne also has a pretty big spread in terms of price and performance. The entry-level Cayenne has a turbo V6 that makes somewhere in the neighborhood of 350 horsepower, while the Nürburgring weapon Cayenne Turbo GT makes around 650 horsepower out of a twin-turbo V8, and it shares a lot of parts with the Lamborghini Urus. The Cayenne fills the role of being for people that, again, resonate with the Porsche brand, but have a little bit more money to spend, but are either unable or unwilling to buy a sports car. Now, if there's a weak link in the Porsche lineup, it is the Panamera. The Panamera is somewhere between a mid or full-size luxury sports sedan, and it was launched in 2009. The Panamera was Porsche's attempt to better compete with some of the other German luxury sedans, kind of somewhere between the BMW 5 and 7 series or the Mercedes-Benz E and S-Class. And over the years, there have been about 100 different variants of the Panamera with all kinds of different powertrains, from V6s to V8s to turbo V8s to hybrid assist, and just about everything in between. And while I do think it made sense at the time for Porsche to come out with a vehicle like this, it never quite reached the sales success of a vehicle like the Cayenne. It does continue to sell in pretty moderate quantities globally, and Porsche seems committed to continuing to produce the Panamera into the future. But my question is, as the Panamera becomes more and more electrified, at what point does it make sense to keep that and the Taycan both in the same lineup? And speaking of the Taycan, let's dive into that model next. The Taycan was Porsche's first all-electric model that started production in 2019. We all know that, like it or not, the majority of the auto market is moving pretty quickly towards electrification. The first EV to reach mainstream popular success was the Tesla Model S. The Model S was a luxury car that competed with the 5 Series in the E-Class, but of course the big differentiator was that it was electric. And since then, Tesla has came out with a few other offerings, like 2 crossover SUVs as well as a smaller sedan. But Porsche chose that same entry point into the market that Tesla originally did when they came out with the Taycan, a luxury performance sedan. Now, to compare the Taycan to the Panamera, the Taycan is going to be a little bit smaller, and the Taycan also has a Audi sibling that it shares a platform with in the form of the Audi e-tron GT. Now, like many EVs, the Taycan has incredible straight line speed, but if you read some of the reviews, a thing that a lot of the journalists pick up on is that it handles a lot better than some of the other electric vehicles that it competes with. So in closing, the Taycan plays a really important role in Porsche's lineup right now by basically being its first and currently only electric vehicle offering. Now it is time for the Porsche 911. I don't think that there is a single car company out there whose overall brand as a car company is so intertwined with one individual model as Porsche is with the 911. So a little bit of history. The 911 is Porsche's sports car that they came out with in the 1960s as a replacement for the 356. And since then, Porsche has continued to refine this car by adding power, technology, and safety, while still staying pretty true to the original plan. To this day, the 911 is still only made with a flat 6 rear-mounted engine, and we can see carries over a lot of the design elements from the original car. Now, I know a lot of the Porsche models that we've discussed so far, I've said they have a wide range in terms of price and performance. Well, the 911 has the widest range by far. The 911 serves the role of being a luxury coupe in all-weather performance grand tour, a track car, a rally car, a drag car, and just about everything in between. Really, for any type of performance driving that you would want to do, except for maybe like drifting, there is a Porsche 911 for it. Just to hit on a few examples, there's the base model Carrera, which is a perfect everyday driver. There's the GT3 RS, which is basically a race car that you can drive on the street. And then there's the 911 Dakar that has off-road suspension and skid plates that you could take rally driving. The Macan and the Cayenne might be the most important to Porsche in terms of sales dollars, but their core product is really the 911. I pretty firmly believe that everybody that buys a Porsche really wants a 911, but because of price, space, usability, they settle for one of those other models. So that's it. That is the Porsche lineup for right now, kind of midway through 2024. We have 2 crossover SUVs, 1 compact, 1 full size. We have 2 sedans, a slightly smaller electric sedan and a slightly larger gas-powered sedan. And we have 2 sports cars, the entry-level mid-engine offering and the 911. Now, short of Porsche diluting their brand by coming out with a super entry-level model or doing something ridiculous like coming out with a pickup truck, I really think they have all their bases covered. And this is accomplished by Porsche having an offering in all of the different key segments and having such a wide range on those vehicles that regardless of what you're looking to get out of your car, there is a Porsche that you can buy.